why Neo should have stayed in the Matrix. He did stay in the Matrix.
Not really. He broke out and then he wreaked havoc, right? Ultimately, he's just a whiny engineer. It's really hard for me to take. Like the Matrix, at the end, he's in a cave.
No, at the end, he turns into Neo Jesus and gets reincorporated back into the Matrix or something. I don't quite know that I understand the end of the third.
No, I don't think I understand the end of any of them, but sci-fi has it correct. So it's not real. Who cares? The Matrix makes it real. What more was he looking for? What could he not get out of the Matrix?
It's bad. It's bad that we're all freaking copper tops in a giant thing keeping the machines alive, and yet you're right, like the world you get dumped into is not, it's even more horrifying if you have to live on, slop and gruel and go fight machines. And then the second and third movies point out that they've done this, like your reincarnation, and it's the fifth time that the machines have killed Zion, and it gets weird and bad and worse. Like, yeah, I can kind of understand just being like, no, I'm gonna go have a good steak. I'm not actually eating steak, but I don't care. It seems like steak to me.
Yeah, and I also question, like, what was copper tops, by the way? I love that. What did it matter? We had purpose. Everybody had true purpose, right? You want to talk about people existential crisis when you're a teenager and everyone's like, why am I here? What's my purpose? You had purpose in the Matrix. You were powering the system. And
no, that's like saying cows have purpose because they feed us. I mean, I don't think a cow is going to get personal satisfaction.
Are we not aligned on that?
I mean, cows are delicious. I'm glad that we use them that way, turning off all of our vegan listeners, but the cow doesn't get personal satisfaction out of that, which is a fundamental human right, which we are going to talk about.
Oh, I don't know if that's true. I don't know. Are we any greater than a cow?
I don't recall seeing any good cow art. Now, to be fair, I haven't looked that closely at the pastures that they're stomping around in. Maybe they're making some amazing things out of grass, but...
In some cultures, the cow is sacred, and we are not.
Sure.
I struggle, and well, it's a great movie. It's one of the best movies I've seen in my life. The first one.
The first one.
But I still struggle with at the end, it just seems all too irrelevant, and it just seems like a bunch of really whiny people who want to create anarchy, all under the guise of free will, which I'd argue hasn't really been proven that we even have it, right? So shame on Neo, shame on Trinity.
I guess we'll get into free will on possibly this episode or future episodes. We're going full existential on this one, apparently.
Yeah, this is where I'm going to ostracize myself from a ton of people because they're going to realize just how much on the machine side and AI side I really am.
Should be interesting. We'll see if this one ends up in the vault, as in an unreleased horror show that we can't actually put onto the podcast feed.
Yep.
Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the Zoom from me is Andrew Greener. Ooh, across the Discord from me is Andrew Greener. New setup, folks. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper on the human elements. I could go on for an eternity about the people and how they think about the process of building complex systems. And I can't think of two better people to do that than Kevin and Andrew.
We tried to book two better people for the show, but our audience is not yet big enough for them to come on. On this week's show, we'll probably be getting a little heated as we talk about possible futures where AI is in control or at least taking over most of our lives. I like the idea of a Star Trek utopian future, but I don't think that's where we're headed, at least not on our current track.
I'd like to think that's where we're heading to, and I think people think I'm outrageous, but I'm more often than not, I'm correct.
He said humbly.
Yeah, I say that reservedly. It's about how long it's going to take us, right? And that is one of my biggest problems with the human race is everything would be much quicker if we just let AI take over, basically.
A future version of AI, not the one that's currently killing pedestrians in self-driving cars.
No, exactly. And it's actually interesting. I think in some of my show notes, I do steal a quote, which is essentially, it's not really going to be AI that progresses us, right? It's going to be humans that are augmented with AI, right? So it's we're going to create the next best version of ourselves, but we somehow have to get AI integrated into our decision making process. So that's where I want it to go.
I don't think I can do a good Mike Myers impression from his coffee talk lady, but artificial intelligence is neither artificial nor intelligent. Discuss. Current AI is not actually AI. Machine learning is human input to complex to varying degrees algorithms and is entirely dependent on the human input. It is not itself learning. It is learning what it is fed, and that is not intelligence. Intelligence could look at all possible sources and come up with its own conclusions. AI today has never once formed its own conclusion.
Yes, sorry, I'm still stuck on. I thought you were going to do an Austin Powers impression. Oh, behave.
No,
Yeah,
his Saturday Night Live coffee talk woman.
yeah, I don't know any of his other stuff. Well, I don't know why you would want to know any of his other stuff other than Austin Powers. So I'm still on the behave.
I feel like So I Married an Axe Murderer is good, but I don't remember because it was the 90s and it was when comedies weren't actually funny. So I don't know if that's true.
But you are correct. You are correct. Artificial intelligence, the way it is today. So this show is really going to be about us dreaming, right, to some extent. And I know it's going to go there to some extent, and it's going to take us so many generations to get to some of the things we're talking about. But I do honestly believe that AI is going to help us understand more about how our brain works and the decision making process. And then that's going to propel the next version of AI. And then AI is going to propel the next version of our understanding of the universe and the brain. And it's going to be a vicious cycle, which is glorious and beautiful. And it's going to lead to how we become one with AI, right? So we're starting to see things like your best friend Elon there. He's about to stick chips in people. You got people like myself queuing up to be first for V1. So I think it's going to be the self sort of fueling process of humans and AI propelling each other into the future until there's no distinction between us.
Horrifying. All right, should be an interesting conversation.
Beautiful, beautiful.
But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call User Stories, where we'll eventually be answering questions that you, the listener, send in. But for now, I think we found some interesting questions on Reddit and Quora that we can tackle. So today's question was asked by Skeptical Droid on Reddit, and it is: I see a lot of threads here about how AI will create a moneyless society where our every needs are taken care of. Also see lots of posts about the desperation of the immediate job loss that society will face. I really want to understand, why do we have this need for an AI savior? And they go on to talk about the current millennial and Gen Z generations that are facing what they consider to be dire circumstances, from rising inequality to climate change, and whether this isn't just millions of people hoping for a magical savior rather than having to put in the work to make the future better themselves. I think there's something to that, and I'm sure we're going to disagree for most of this episode, but let's start with what your point of view is on what we'll call for today's discussion technological utopianism.
So let's put some definition around technological utopianism. That's any ideology based on the premise that advances in science and technology could and should bring about a utopia, or at least help fulfill one or another utopian ideal. And that is, guys, that is taken right out of Wiki, which is a very general, broad explanation. If I was to summarize this, because I often have these concepts myself and don't go look for definition until I have to, for me, it really is about technology is basically going to eliminate the need for us to have to work. The core fundamental value for me, it's we're going to be able to go spend our time doing better things with our lives, but the gap that we have to make up is feeding ourselves, housing ourselves, educating ourselves, having proper healthcare, and all of these things are super controversial, but that is essentially what people like me, I guess if there's a group of us, technological utopians, that's what we believe. We can get into, I've broken this down in a couple of different ways. So the what, it's essentially what I talked about. It's getting up in the morning and living somewhere that's safe and knowing that your family is provided for. I'm not necessarily saying that your food box is going to show up on a Monday and your medicine's going to show up on a Wednesday delivered by some external invisible service, right? I'm not saying that. I think there's steps to go until we get there. But I'm essentially envisioning a world where we switch our focus from the material needs to the immaterial pursuit of happiness, music and arts and literature. It's a Renaissance 2.0, but better. I think we're going to get into why Renaissance V1 wasn't such a success, but sure. I'd also argue it kind of was, but there's always a bad side, which we'll get into. I don't know if you want to talk about the Reformation and Renaissance 1.0 right now.
No, we'll get to it. So let's go into parts of that what. You're saying, the food box that arrives is being produced by farmer robots that are out in the fields doing all of the farming for us. They're doing all of the packaging. Like, so at what point does a human being get involved? Is it all fully automated through machines and you don't have to worry about any of that? Was the delivery a robot?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, that's all. I just want to clarify what's going on in those situations. Okay.
And actually, it's a pretty good day trip to take the family out. If you said to the kids, "Hey, do you want to know where our food comes from?" That's the day trip, right? You're heading out to the country and you're going to watch a bunch of drones picking apples from a tree, and you'll say, "Well, that's the box that shows up on a Monday, kids. This is where it all comes from."
Okay, so let's go to the medicine box. The medicine box arrives with your weekly prescription of whatever you need because you have whatever genetic condition we haven't figured out how to treat. So it's still a chronic thing, and so you need that. So pharmacist is a robot. Who invented that new drug? Does medical research get handed over to the robots, or do we still need to train doctors and scientists?
Yeah, I suspect there's still going to be people who work, right? I think there's the interesting thing we have to understand is there's a tipping point, right? There's a tipping point in society where enough people are not working, and this is the real challenge. I call it the gap between the new way of living and today. And as we start to see more and more people losing their positions to artificial intelligence, the gap is at some point you reach critical mass where there's enough people not working and straining the system, and now you start to look at society tearing itself down, saying, well, we can't afford to live, right? So I always call it the gap. So there may still be people who exist for many generations until we figure it out, but ultimately it goes back to what I was saying. AI and ourselves will eventually have to be integrated. There will be you won't be able to distinguish between, well, that's a human who has an AI built into him. And I think that's where Neuralink goes, right? That's where all this brain technology is going, is that in the future we will have people who are just incredibly efficient at making decisions using AI.
So I have two problems with this. Not because I don't like the ideal end state, but because the road there, and then once you're there, are the challenges.
The gap. Let's call it the gap.
Sure.
I've coined it as the gap. Yes, that is the challenge. But here's why, again, our inability to follow simple frameworks is proven. Now there are some industries where that has progressed in the military, in airline technology. And look at the role of a checklist in airlines, right, has dramatically reduced fatalities and incidents. So they have a very simple framework like a checklist, but anything more complex than that, and humans start to break down. Agile medical treatment plans. There's an immense amount of medical fraud in the United States, globally. Financial modeling, right? We start to break down with complex frameworks, right? So my argument is really to put that in the hands of a more efficient system. But the gap is the challenge, right? So I think I'm proven, or at least I think my argument is strong on the why. The challenge is going to be the gap. But the alternative to what I'm saying, which is start planning for now and changing attitudes and start introducing the concept of people living this way, is society starts to tear down because there'll be a tipping point when there's so many people out of work and we're still relying on old systems like social security and benefits and supplements to help them live. The system will collapse. So I'm saying let's start preparing now for the day where most people are not working.
Sure. So let's put the gap aside for a second and just focus on the what in the future. So in that what future, I guess my problem is maybe I just don't believe that AI will ever actually get to a human being level of intelligence. And so my question then becomes all of the nitpicky things. When the farmer robot breaks down, then there needs to be the repair robot who can come and repair the robot. And if you don't have the intelligence to have a repair robot, then you need a human being who still went through enough education and wants to be an AI technician to go and repair the robots and the software, and software has never once stopped evolving, so someone still needs to be a software engineer working on AI version 42.
That's fine. But at some point, again, my advocacy is for the human and the AI to become much more connected, right? So it's the evolution. The robots are picking oranges and apples in the beginning, but at the same time, you have humans and AI working together to figure out, well, how do we never have to eat an orange or an apple again?
You want the Soylent future where it's just that gross gray sludge that everyone drinks.
Yes, Okay, yeah. Okay, not quite as severe as that. You really marketed that deliberately in a negative light, but it is accurate for people like me who eat to live, and there are a lot of us. That would be a choice, and we're also assuming that the machines are not planning ahead like we don't to say, well, hey, in the event of our collapse, you're gonna need 100 years worth of resources stacked away, hidden underground in secure vaults, controlled by humans and AI collaboratively. So if there's ever an issue, then you guys can survive for this long until you can get us back online again. We don't plan that way.
And we don't plan that way, and AI and machine learning is based on us. And so I'm not convinced that AI is ever going to get one, I'm not convinced that silicon chips are ever going to get to the point of a human brain. So what new weird technology is going to have to show up? And at that point we already have humans. Why do we need AI to do that for
I
us?
get that, but the AI will accept the version one of people like me as the entry level to the model, which is okay. The first version of the, I don't want to call us doomsday planners. That's not what we are, right? Because we're not thinking about the end of the world. But it will accept the people who plan for the gap, who are saying these are the things we need to do. Eventually, AI will look at that model and say, well, it was a good first effort by the humans because they did plan ahead. They did recognize, like, hey, in the event of complete power failure across the planet, they're going to need 6 months worth of resources. They're so cute, these humans think 6 months would be enough. But that will then learn, right? Like in collaboration with us, and it will not necessarily make the decision, but it will show us, wow, we were way off. 6 months was never going to be enough. And we had too many perishables in there and da 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 da. So yeah, it has to be in collaboration. I'm just saying it's going to take brilliant minds to sit and plan alongside, and then the AI will help us make those decisions. But the majority of us won't work.
Yeah, and my concern is that the people who are going to have the money and the resources to do that are not going to make decisions for this 8 billion of us on this planet. They're going to make the decisions for the guy whose yacht got trapped in Denmark or wherever because it was too tall for the bridge it needed to go under.
Okay, but now let's take the alternative. Let's assume I'm correct and we're evolving into that with no planning whatsoever. It's going to happen anyway, but there is going to be societal collapse because the powerful rich folk will continue to grow and become rich and powerful, and people will be out of work with no plan to take care of them, right? And I argue that's going to happen anyway. So either we get on board and start planning for that inevitability, or there's going to be a problem.
Okay, sure. So the problem I have with this is like it's a mental exercise to say, what if every card I was dealt was good, and so the future lays out the way you think it's going to lay out, and AI gets smart enough to be a partner with us, and the best people get access to the partnership with AI, and we plan for all of this, and things change. And my problem is I like to be optimistic about people in mass, but also I'm incredibly pessimistic about history and how we have never once done this successfully in the past.
Absolutely. I'm not saying this is easy. The gap is the thing that worries me. And it worries me for my kids and my kids' kids, right? But the gap is, I think, one of the most defining, darkest moments in human civilization if we don't accept it. Because let's talk about the alternative for a second. AI continues to grow and we start to eliminate an incredible number of positions.
But that's what I want to challenge is I feel like there's a third path, which is fuck AI. Why? We're human beings. We can make the choice to do all of this better. And if my choice is we continue down the path without AI and we don't make things better, we continue down the path without AI and we choose to make things better, we continue on a new path where AI helps us and things get worse, and we hope for a better future. I have 4 options, 2 of which end well. I can hope for a better future either with AI or without AI, or I can expect a crappy future with or without AI. So why don't I hope for the better future that we all do, and I don't need to worry about the gap at all?
Because you just said it yourself. Like, you're extremely pessimistic about the collective. So you're hoping that AI doesn't go there. I can tell you the minute that humans figure out they can do something, someone is going there. And the rich and the powerful and the corps are going there, right?
Yeah.
There is, we see the news like, hey, government needs to step in and moderate this thing. Good luck, good luck. So it's going there. Now we're expecting to roll back the idea and we collectively say, F you AI, we're not going there? No way. No way. We're going there. It's happening.
The irony of this being that I am the annoying liberal who is all for community social action, and you are not, and yet you are the one who thinks more highly of our ability to get through the gap than I do.
I don't. It is somewhat optimistic thinking in my sense, right? I actually don't think certainly in my lifetime, I don't think it'll be a challenge. And I don't think people like me, I think people will look at me, it's hindsight is always leave somebody looking great, right? Was it
Sure.
Who's the sci-fi writer from 100 years ago who predicted something and everyone was like,
Jules Verne.
there we go, Jules Verne. There's Wells as well, right? And we look at their work and we say, man, look how close they were. This is kind of weird, but look how close they were. In 100 years, someone might hear this podcast and be like, I bet we'd listen to this asshole, right? Because I think we will actually be there after my lifetime, right? But I think I think we do see some severe societal problems in the gap because people like me will just be these crazy guys out there who are saying, oh, smart glasses and AI and da-da-da and all these things that are in the movies like Minority Report, they're going to happen. And everyone is sort of like, nah, there's a third option.
But the gap has already started. Uber has ruined industries at the expense of paying people. Being a taxi driver in New York was not earning you six figures necessarily, but it was a life you could lead and pay for shelter and food and your family and everything. And Uber has ruined that. So the gap is already here.
Well, it's been there for a long time. I'm not picking on the coal miners, right? But they literally wait for election hoping that the change in leadership is going to change their outlook. And it's very distressing to watch where you see these people who for generations, they've been working in this field and science is getting close now to completely eliminating that role for them, right?
Sure.
And that's been going on for decades, right? And sometimes I fall on both sides. Sometimes I'm like, hey, you've sort of seen this for generations now. It's time to reinvent yourselves. Maybe assume that it is going away eventually. So that's going to keep happening, I suspect. So the gap is going to be very real.
Yeah, the gap is very real. And in our current system, there's no incentive to undo that. Unlimited growth, fueled by Wall Street, churns through every industry. And at some point in the next 20 years, every industry, newspapers have already suffered from it, TV is currently suffering from it, every industry is going through this, transportation is going through this, all of these industries are going through this, and the outcome is, if I can get 5% more growth in the next quarter, and then that means 2 quarters later that an entire industry is dead, that's the decision they make. It's so incredibly short-sighted, and we're going to be in a completely different world in 20 years, and there won't even, how do you bridge that? And there's 150 years of suffering in front of us.
Well,
before.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the 150 years because my assumption here, or I'm hoping the speed at which this changes, the sting is so quick. Now, I think I'll be old at least when we start to feel the sting to the level that I'm thinking it really is the catalyst for change. But I think change has become so exponential. When it finally hits, the sting will be so severe that will prompt conversation. I think change over 150 years is a little bit more like a tumor growing, right? And I speak, openly about that, having had one in the past, but it's gradual. You don't notice the change, right? You just, afterwards when someone tells you, hey, by the way, this is what you have,
Sure.
You're like, I notice the symptoms now. I think if it happened over a long period of time, governments would be able to get by with just allowing generations to die. Same way they did in the past. It's with the farmers have been through this, the coal miners again, they've gone through this, right? And fossil fuel. I think it's going to be harder for governments to ignore when the sting is so broad and so obvious and actually so rapid. Because I think we will start to see, to your point, industries just collapse in very short windows of time.
Well, and I guess the thing I don't understand is only because the world changed its mind in the early 1900s did the robber barons avoid the guillotine. I don't understand if you're a billionaire today and you're looking at what you're doing to these industries and you're looking at the situation you're putting people into, the end result of this is the guillotine. It always is. It's always pitchforks and torches. And so I don't know why you wouldn't want to say, well, I could just have $4 billion instead of $8 billion and I could avoid that. And the problem is they're not the ones avoiding the guillotine. Their children and their grandchildren are the ones who need to avoid the mob in the future. But I don't understand the thought process of how we get here and why people can't just see you could be okay with $4 billion. You don't need 8.
And that's going to be the challenge, right? And I believe the one of the principles of sort of technological utopianism, right? And I'm still learning about it because, like I say, I just naturally feel this way. I love it when I go find that somebody has coined the phrase and talked about it in more depth because it allows me to structure my thinking better. But post-scarcity is the suggestion that the economic situation where most goods can be produced in an abundance, so enough for everybody to live, that has to have occurred for the technological utopia to be considered a success, I imagine. So there's 2 questions that arise then. One, do I give a shit about the billionaire who's sitting on $100 billion if I have enough. But the more important question is, can I create the abundance without restricting the billionaire to an acceptable amount and then saying the rest has to go back into the system to invest into becoming post-scarcity? And I'm not just talking about for America, I'm talking about for the planet. So now
Right.
you have to topple egomaniacs in some instances.
We could afford to cure most of the world's problems. There are UN reports that say the dollar amount to end global hunger is less than the top 100 people in the world are worth, and you could take away 90% of the billionaires' wealth and they would still be so obscenely wealthy, their life wouldn't dramatically change. And that is the thing, is the solutions are in front of us. You could solve homelessness in the US and you would have to lose like one NFL football franchise. That's it. Like, does anyone care if the Bengals are no longer a football team? No.
That's why I also pointed out in the opening, there are some countries who are primed to lead in this thought process. And I wonder, right, because they're countries that at times would be considered controversial, human rights issues, et cetera, manipulation of currency, not adhering to standards around the environment. But I look at the certain countries in the world who are almost primed from a political structure to succeed. And I wonder whether we'll see a change in their political tactics in their home countries as we start to see this potential for post-scarcity, right? So populations drop, become more controlled, political reform changes to be less strict on the people, and then we start to see post-scarcity tactics like the manufacturing of buildings. We're seeing the early signs of that. We're seeing countries like China build Lego buildings, and people are talking about the sustainability of it. And I'm like, forget the sustainability of it all. Like, let's talk about the fact that that is the first step potentially to post-scarcity. Manufacturing affordable homes that are acceptable for people to live in, that they're not going to gripe about. And that's what I would love to focus on. So I'm curious as to whether this all kicks off somewhere else and is successful somewhere else before we finally catch up decades later.
I think so. Two things. One, I follow enough people on Twitter and have some like friends of friends who are of various Chinese, Philippine. There are some East Asian folks who talk about the way that their culture is just very drastically different and expectations around family and just interesting things where to them it's totally wild that kids move out at 18 to go to college and never come home again. Like there's very drastic cultural differences between East and West and plenty of other dimensions to that. And I wonder that there is a factor there that neither of us have enough background and understanding of to properly talk about. But I would think that that is a factor to it. I am concerned that two of your statements in there, population reduces through famine and war and poverty, and like that's a hard thing to ask the world to swallow. And also the reason some of that happens, I think there's cultural differences. It's also authoritarianism, and there's a balancing act of the US is a degree of freedom that is both more and less than other Western countries in Europe and other places. And we're not going to get into all of the ways that the US is a special little snowflake in both good and bad ways, but the amount of choice and individual quote unquote liberty that people have argues against that. That's the entire concept of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. People who are homeowners and therefore decide they get to have a veto over the lives of other people because it messes with their home valuation. There's a degree of, I'm not going to call it selfishness, but it is basically selfishness that interferes with the ability to have some of these collective actions that we're going to need, whether it's AI, whether it's climate change, whether it's poverty in the global south, whether it's a bunch of things.
And the challenge will be in 500 years when they're looking at the history books and they look at the Reformation and they say, well, a lot of people died there. What are they going to say about our time period? And they're undoubtedly going to say some similar things. I always think there's going to be that in the future they look back and say, wow, thankfully we're much more civilized today. So we're not the end state is my point. We are one iteration in a version. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point in humanity where we say, that's it, this is releasable. This is the release, this is the version one. Everything else before this was beta and pre-release. But we are in a stage of history, where people will read and say they did bad things. But I'm sort of taking that long approach, which is in 500 years, if we've solved half of the medical problems that we refuse to deal with today, and there's no more famine, and there's no more, everybody has a home, and there is this renaissance where people are living their lives, reading literature and hiking the planet, and maybe we're planet hopping at that point. Will those people in 500 years care how they got there? Or will they just care that those things don't exist?
Yeah, but the Reformation is a perfect example of it was pre-Enlightenment. It was pre-mid mid-Renaissance, and we are smarter people now. We have a better understanding of humanity, and we can make the choice. We can make the choice today that it's not worth the pedestrian lives to have self-driving cars. We can make the choice that the way we're going to get to a self-driving car future is more safe and secure. I want to get to a self-driving car future because I'd love to have all of those problems that happen when people get behind the wheel go away. But the path we choose to get there is a choice. And we're currently making bad choices. We're currently letting billionaires decide that human life is not as important to them as the profit they will get from a self-driving car. And so we put things on the road before they're ready. We are not at a point of technological advancement that AI is smart enough. Computer vision is not smart enough. The processing power is not smart enough. A self-driving Tesla in that video ran over a child in the middle of the crosswalk for a reason. We're not there yet. I want us to be there. There's benefits to it, but it's not there yet. And so we, as a culture, can decide to make a better choice.
But that's idealistic, right? Like, and I'm the same as you, right? I still wake up every day and feel like a 16-year-old kid, and asking myself, like, why have we not solved these problems? Like, how can we just not pull in the same direction? I often think, I spend probably a few moments a day thinking about the ants versus us. The difference, the ants just get up in the morning and they're just like, all right, cool, I know what I'm doing today. I am pulling for the queen, and I'm just going out there and I'm just doing my thing, right? We don't have that by any sense. So still an idealistic sort of mentality, right? I have allowed myself to be punched around the ring a little bit and just accept that these things happen. And so I'm just kind of on autopilot, but I am calling out the gap, and I am calling out where whoever gets us to that utopian future, I'm kind of backing.
But the problem is the gap is a choice. The gap is a choice.
Whose choice?
And that's the problem. It's all of our choice.
All of
the
our
problem
choice.
when you start talking, when you talk in aggregates and human beings, this is the reason why individuals are smart. They make very smart decisions for themselves. We are actually pretty good individually. There is a known phenomenon of the mob. Mobs form because humans have this weird, I don't know what leftover evolutionary bird flocking mentality we have, but when we are in groups, we make terrible decisions. And so this is why a lot of the times you end up with situations where we have individual saviors of FDR and all of these people who we laud as this individual who did a thing, but I'm not sure that that's actually the way forward.
Right. So 2 points on that. One is, what is the framework that we have created to handle large groups of people making a choice that will lead to selecting somebody who will make decisions that we want?
Democracy. It's the worst form of government except for all the others.
And it's completely broken right now because, one, I think we've just seen through years of research that sometimes it doesn't even matter what your visionary is saying, you're on board. You like the color. Everybody else around you is applying pressure. So whatever. I don't want to get too deep into that. So then the next thing is like self-motivated people collectively getting together. And I used to joke in the past, which was, can you imagine if we all decided to take a sick day at the same time? We just collectively all said, screw this. Collectively, we're really powerful. Let's just take a day off. Let's see how much it costs the economy.
It's called a general strike, and it's a union tactic, and no one likes unions anymore.
I know, but it's in a framework, right? So again, it's not realistic to believe that everyone is collectively going to form and do something rational that is non-violent. Hopefully there's peaceful protesters still in the world who can exercise their rights to protest, but does it move the dial? I'm not sure it moves it enough. So I'll introduce the third, which is the exceptional individual, which I think, I'm not really sure if that exists anymore, because the exceptional individuals that I see on the news every day are exceptional for anything other than exceptional reasons. So I don't know if that's a viable pathway either. We might have to embrace the suck.
Yeah, but I refuse to believe. So this is where I'm apparently the optimist and you're the pessimist, because I refuse to believe that we have to choose, that the answer to this is, well, yeah, there's going to be 50 years in which poverty and all of the pain inflicted by this kills 1 billion people, and that is such a shock to the system that we then need to go and murder all the billionaires, and in this new future utopia that we've formed as a result of it. That's horrifying. Not really for the billionaire part, but for the rest.
Wow. Just for our listeners, I hope you know that's not what I'm banking on, right? Okay, so let's go there for a second. I haven't given up on my optimism that much, right? To say that we should just let the gap suck. But we have to rely on a new type of people embracing the suck, right? And then we'll see what the collective does. Because it was one thing, did the white collar industry care when it was the blue collar workers? Oh, Detroit's gone. Oh, Manchester in England and textiles gone. Yeah, that stings. Stings for those guys. But you know what? Go back to school and be white collar because the white collar jobs will never go away. When we start taking white collar jobs away, now you're talking about like a bunch of people who are going to start thinking, how do we band together with the blue collar workers now and fix this problem? So I don't think we have to necessarily deal with the 50 years of suck, but I think we are going to have to start to see some exceptional people become exceptional again. And they're going to have to come out of that wave of people who start to lose their jobs, who are impacted.
And none of those people are in charge today.
No, I know. We have to see, and actually, maybe some of the exceptional will be that it isn't somebody affected. Maybe we love it's America, right? So we love a story. We love the sacrifice. This person wasn't even affected by the loss of their job, and here they are protesting and shouting as loud as anybody who was affected by it, right? We need exceptional people to make exceptional sacrifice and start to work on the gap. Or we need to convince big business that it's the right thing to do. You've got enough billions.
I'm unconvinced happens without the weight of government action. I'm not sure it ever has. Big business is human beings, and it's a very few small number of human beings making choices for themselves. And the problem is, you can go and find me the example of the good billionaire. There's that one guy who like paid all of his employees $150,000 a year. I'm pretty sure it turned out to be abusive to his wife, so it's not a great story. But they are, even the supposedly good ones, that's the exception, not the rule. The rule is Wall Street. Wall Street is carnivorous. It is devouring.
But isn't it a vicious cycle? Doesn't Wall Street's not going to give up on the money it makes from the general everyday investor, right? Like the on the street regular Joe who's investing, that money's going to go away, right? When people start to lose their jobs, right? So it might actually, I don't know how much that would be, but it's kind of like the three body problem, right? There are too many moving pieces in the financial institutions to figure out what the tipping point is.
Right.
But at some point it is a vicious cycle where finance can no longer ignore the fact that, well, these people, they're not paying their mortgages, right? We're going to have another collapse. They're not investing.
They clearly ignored that. They asked the government for a bailout, and the government bailed them out and solved it, and they learned nothing from it. So, no, I don't know. The current system is not designed to help Wall Street learn any lessons.
But the cycle will either get shorter to that happening, or it will get bigger. That's my prediction, right? We had the housing collapse. I don't want to get into like CEOs and all that synthetic debt or all of that crap on the trading side, but I think the cycle will get shorter as the waves of white collar workers goes away much quicker, right? So if it's exponential and when we close down industries in 5 years, then the cycle of those events gets much shorter. And I think
sure, and I'm just saying, why do we have to go through any of that pain? We all can predict that pain. We all can see that pain. Why can't action happen now? Why do you need to always inflict pain in order to find solutions?
And what you just asked there is why I want the machines in control. Because we don't do well in frameworks. We don't learn from the past like we should. And you did say, like, there's this period of enlightenment where we got better and we realized, right? So then how do we make the same mistakes over and over? And I'm hoping not solely the machines on their own. I'm saying eventually I'd like to see us integrated, literally, physically integrated. We don't do well in frameworks. We don't do well with the past. We don't do well with cycles because there's greedy people who don't care.
Okay, so let's go down that road of you're integrating yourself with AI to somehow supplement and augment your brain's ability to process information.
Yeah, let's do the brute force, and let's just say you had said the computer will never be able to do something that we can do, right? What's the gap that you see?
I'm unconvinced we understand how human intelligence works. I think you watch something like Westworld, for the first season at least, is a really good exploration, actually, until it went weird in the second and third seasons. But the first season's a really interesting exploration of what counts as intelligence, and the bicameral mind is the name of that final episode, because there is this weird thing that one of the hypotheses is the fact that you talk to yourself inside your head is a part of our intelligence, and it's a weird thing. And since we don't understand that, I'm unconvinced we know how to build that into technology.
Perfect. So then why build it at all? What if the technology was just plugged into us and it relied upon us for that. And we found a way to feed ourselves the right data, and we found a way to get the data back out again. That's the kind of augmentation I'm talking about. What if, and that's the copper top. This is why I don't have a problem with the copper top. If people like me want to experience a life plugged in, but the machine is now leveraging my ability, and I always describe it as how we think is sometimes probably more important than what we know. And if the computer can't figure out, if we can't figure out how to build how we think, then just plug us in and let us continue to do the thinking, but let the machine feed us the correct data, knowing that it's going to make a decision based on the numbers it gets back from us, right? And I'm simplifying it.
You're simplifying, but also the programming that went into making the machine able to give you the quote unquote correct answers was also written by a human being at one point. So it is fundamentally flawed. There's a reason why the go-to example of face recognition didn't recognize African Americans, because a bunch of white dudes programmed it with a bunch of their family photos. And human beings are, that's a bad example for many reasons, but also just human beings are flawed today. Our thinking is flawed today. You find a neurodivergent person who programs in one aspect of it, and now through no fault of their own, that's not a critique of neurodivergence, that's a natural state of human beings, but that's now programmed into the AI too.
But I was fighting about this on LinkedIn this week, right? That's just evolution, right? The first motor car didn't have an airbag, right? Like these are simple things that I would expect in the early versions. I remember distinctly at one of the earliest startups back in the early 2000s and pointing out, is anybody concerned that all of our icons are Caucasian? And I remember being laughed out of the room by the designers, like, is this guy for real? And I'm like, I'm a kid, what do I know? Like, I'm right out of school, early startup. These are early version problems that we've already identified. First problem with fixing anything is identify you have a problem. So we've identified that. So we'll fix it, right? We'll fix it.
No, we won't. No, we won't. We absolutely won't. We absolutely won't.
Now you're the pessimist. Now you're the pessimist.
I'll tell you why. Because how many companies have you been at where you had legacy software? So my mom currently works at a place that still has DOS screens. It is DOS prompts. It is a black and white or black and green, whatever screen. It's a matrix screen. And they're still using DOS because the company is profitable. The company is treating its workers incredibly well. The company is doing everything you want a company like this to do. And I don't know all of the reasons behind it, but I would imagine that they currently think the DOS software does the job it needs to do. And it has a bunch of problems in 2024, and yet they're not going to invest in changing it because it just gets enough of the job done, and they're prioritizing other things. Companies do this every day. There's a reason that Internet Explorer 6 had the lock-in that it had for a decade and a half, because so many company intranets were written to use the proprietary things that Internet Explorer 6 did, and the inertia that created in the Fortune 500 around internal tools was monumental, and we are barely getting past that. So your idea that we're not going to be stuck with AI version, I'll give you 3.0. That's it.
You wait a minute. You don't think we'd go any further than 3.0?
I'm saying we'd be stuck with 3.0 for so long that the suffering that will cause based on decisions being made through flawed human programming in the gap is real bad.
No. And anyway, if we get to version 3.0 in AI, the gap is well and truly open.
Right, and now it's making real bad decisions based on human flawed logic.
But I'm not even worried about honestly, I don't think that's a scenario. Because in that scenario then, the machine is making such bad decisions, people start going back to work. I don't believe that. I mean, look at COVID. Look how COVID changed us. People actually started to walk away and say, I'm kind of done. I want to do something else. I do not believe that we will take people away in the gap, and then AI is going to be so bad and doesn't progress quickly enough that they go back. I can't argue that with you because I just fundamentally disagree. Let me ask you this. In 500 years, if my future is real, are you going to be okay in 500 years being the person if I tell you what it took us to get there? Or are you just going to be okay that we're there? There's no starvation. Everybody's got a house. There's global healthcare. There's global education for all. We live in a world where no one is potentially alone. Would you be okay knowing what we went through for 500 years to get there?
No. The process matters. The process matters.
But you're 500 years in the future right now.
Well, sure. I get the benefit of living in Seattle, a place that, Norwegian ancestor person probably shouldn't or wouldn't have been living if there weren't a bunch of horrific things that happened for the past 500 years. So just because I'm happy living in Seattle now doesn't mean I can't be cognizant of the history that got me to this place and this personal happiness.
Okay, let me ask you the second question, or point out to you that you can't go back and change the Reformation
No, of course.
because you don't know what it does to today. So evolution, and this is my whole spiel, right? I'm all about evolution. We're evolving to where we're evolving. And we can have our idealistic views about how we stop that and say, no, there has to be a more conscientious way to evolve. And I think that's a challenge. But none of us can go back and take away those bad things that happened and prove that we'd be in any better place if they didn't happen. And that's going to be the challenge.
So if we're gonna take the argument that sometimes bad things lead to good outcomes, which is morally complex, this is not a moral philosophy
Yeah.
podcast, but let's go down that road. Then in your utopian future in which nothing matters, then jazz and rock and roll coming out of the black struggle of black Americans, does jazz and rock and roll happen without some kind of struggle? So if struggle is good and leads to good outcomes, then the utopian future of everyone's in the metaverse where there are no struggles, art stagnates and dies, and now there is no creativity in this
That's
possible
beautiful.
future.
I think you just spotted my argument. Do 500 million people have to die from a disease before we learn how to make the vaccination? And then what other benefits come from that vaccination and the study of that disease and its effect on the human body? And the advancements, I argue, you can't weigh the advancements necessarily against the loss sometimes, right?
We absolutely can because we just did it 4 years ago. We absolutely can. COVID deaths were a choice. We all had a vaccine within 12 months of that maybe 16 months of that outbreak. We all could have made choices. Kids could have stayed home from school and it would have been bad, but we could have decided that the first graders were going to stay in first grade and not be automatically bumped to second grade. All of the choices we made in 2020 and 2021 were choices because we are, as a society, at the point that we don't have to make that trade-off anymore.
Yes. But it's not over because the effects of what COVID have led to need to be measured over the next 100 years. I'll equate this to the processed food. Processed food companies probably tested their food and were like, the monkey looks good. He ate the peas. My argument was always they should have looked at the monkey's kids and the monkey's grandkids to really get a true telling tale of what that processed food did for generations. So yeah, the monkey didn't die, but what did it do to the DNA of future generations? COVID measure is going to be going for another 100 years. We just changed the way we work. What's the effects? Does it change the weather patterns because people commute into the city less? These are real scientific questions that will have to be studied because of the way traffic patterns have changed and water usage in regions because people don't commute to the city anymore. So I'd argue the benefits of COVID, you won't be able to weigh against the downside of COVID for decades and decades.
I'm saying 90% of, maybe not 90, 70 to 80% of the downside of COVID, we had enough information. We knew we didn't need 1 million deaths in the US, but it became a political punching bag, and therefore we chose as a society not to mitigate that. And so I'm saying that just because we think the gap is coming, and therefore we think that there is going to be suffering as a result of it, but we're all looking forward to the utopian future after the gap, we can mitigate the impact of the gap. We can make the choice. And it's funny you brought up the three body problem earlier. That book series deals with exactly this. They talk about the choices that they all make, knowing the impending, I'm not going to spoil the three body problem and the massive existential threat that as a result of that, but they make choices as a society and that breaks down and they have a gap. And in that gap, they made bad choices and the suffering could have been avoided had we all come together. But as human beings, again, as a mob, we don't make good decisions a lot of the times.
What I love about this conversation is it does link to a future topic we haven't had yet, which is the idea that we learn from disaster.
Sure. It's my number one interview question. I don't want you to tell me about the successful project you had. Tell me about the crappy project that you blew.
Yeah, but also what grew from that, right? Like
yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
What are the successes? So COVID's a challenging one because, and here's where I might be different than humanity. I sound terribly conceited when I say this, but I truly am the ant. I truly, at times, believe that I am an ant and I will die, but I'm just a little tiny piece of a bigger story, right? Like, and for generations.
You want Siri to be your queen.
Yes, because trust me, I don't benefit from 500 years in the future when everybody has their own house and global medicine and I won't. There's no enjoyment in it for me, but I do actually think compassionately how beautiful it will be in 500 years if those people have all the things that we don't have today. And I know that most of the population of the earth don't think that way, but credit to me, like I am the ant. And maybe more people need to be like the ant, which is we just need to better. So I'm allowing myself to go on autopilot and evolve, including the evil billionaires that you don't like, because I know the way to fight them is not, there's no immediate way to fight them. So we have to let some bad things potentially happen before we have ammunition to go fight them. Because asking them to give up their billions will not work.
No. Well, I'm not asking.
Yes, you want to take it away, right? But
Right. So, and what's ironic about some of this is I do, in my product management world, I do agree that pain is actually a very helpful motivator. And I tell people this all the time. I sometimes say the correct way to actually deal with this is to tell the prospect no. The salesperson gets pissed that they just lost their commission on a $4 million deal because we didn't have the functionality to do it. And my answer is, I'm not going to build you in a month the functionality for that one client. I want you to be pissed that you lost 5 deals. And now you come to me as a product manager and to the executives and say, look at the money we're losing as a result of this. And you get the pain forces the prioritization. So in my normal day, I actually don't mind the pain concept because the suffering that I'm causing is salespeople. And I don't mind salespeople having a little bit of discomfort, but I do mind the Gap causing material pain to humanity.
I love that you brought this up because these are the subtle patterns that I'm relating to the way I think. When I put my hand on the stove, at the earliest opportunity, my pain receptors kick in to avoid further damage. Evolution.
But we put our hand on the stove in the Reformation. We put our hand on the stove in the Industrial Revolution. We put our hand on the stove so many times. Why can't we learn the lesson already? We've learned the lesson. The reason that my mom went up to my little cousin as he crawled towards the fireplace, and as he put his hand on the brick of the fireplace, she flicked his finger with her fingernail, and she caused him a pain receptor on his finger, not from fire, but from her. But that he didn't understand that. And so for him, the fireplace was pain. And so he learned he never went to the fireplace again. We can teach these lessons to ourselves without actually burning our hand.
Well, I'll argue this. So with my older boys, I've always tried to, I remember starting early, like, hey, if I tell you this now, you'll avoid it. And then I actually realized, I told them when they got older, my problem as a father was always that I thought I was a time machine. I viewed myself as you, and I'm sort of jumping back in time to talk to myself and say, don't make these same mistakes. And I realized, actually, I wouldn't be who I am today unless I'd been burnt. You have to go through some of these painful things. How much pain? Yes. Do we want the babies crawling in the fire? No. But is it good to put your hand and get burnt occasionally? Absolutely. I think you have to. You have to. You absolutely have to. It's how we evolve.
No, it absolutely depends. So no, there are degrees, as in everything. Nothing is black and white.
Degrees,
so
yes.
I agree with you in concept, but not in literal execution. So sure, you let the kid make a dumb mistake. He goes and gets drunk at the house party and spends the next morning puking his guts out. That's not going to stop him from drinking in the future, by the way. But there are types of lessons where that is true. The suffering of the global South is a choice that we're making to inflict on 4 billion people. That's not an acceptable trade-off.
And this is my challenge. What we're talking about is an advanced evolutionary problem, the gap. We're arguing about things that we were arguing about 75, 100, 200 years ago. I got to kill the optimists here, right? And say, you're worrying about my evolutionary gap where I'm talking about the pain and we experience. We're still fighting about things we were fighting about hundreds of years ago. So the optimist here, I got to argue, loses. We're going to hit the gap. Do I think we'll hit the bottom? I don't think so, right? I hope not. I'm not fully pessimistic that we'll hit the bottom, but I do think we're going to have to feel enough pain that we do see government step in and say, hey, private sector, you can't threaten to leave if we come after you and say, you got to give back. We got to solve that problem, but I don't think we get there without pain.
It feels like we're very much Magneto versus Professor X. Like we both want the same end goal, but one of us has hope that it doesn't have to get that bad. And Magneto was mostly right. And I'm Professor X in this situation.
Okay.
I recognize that.
Yeah.
All right, well, this is a discussion that we could go on and on about, and I'm sure you, the listener, have some thoughts as well. We'll post a link to the Discord and Reddit threads in the show notes to keep the conversation going. And that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. If you liked what you heard, maybe go and drop 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave us a nice review. And if you didn't like what you heard, remember the name of the podcast is My Brother, and Me. Also, tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there grow by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it. And a friendly reminder that we are always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app updated everything and it's now terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com or on the Discord in the User Stories channel, and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up talking a coworker or something. To read articles that we've written on similar topics to the ones we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. You can also follow us on most apps. We're at acceptancepod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog over there. We're also building a community on Reddit at r/acceptance criteria and on Discord. You can find links to both in the show notes and on the blog. And I promise we'll be moderating the crap out of them to keep it a nice little slice of the internet. For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at ktomasuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER, and this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.